Hello, everybody, and happy Friday. My name is Nick Wood. I'm the policy director here at the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association. I want to welcome everybody. As those of y'all who have been watching the show this month know that we're focusing on issues of hunger and food security, which is something that as folks who produce food and assure that people have the nourishment they need, this is an issue that we really need to be thinking about, and the role of local food and farms and assuring that everybody gets fed during this time. So for that and a lot of other reasons, I'm really excited to welcome Mike Darrow. We're going to be having a great discussion about what's happening now in the crisis, as well as looking at some very specific programs that both CFSA and the food banks have done to try and facilitate this getting healthy food to folks, and our role in working together. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mike to tell us a little bit about Feeding the Carolinas and all the groups and food banks and everything else that they work with to do the wonderful work they do. Mike?
Great. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate being out here this morning. Good morning, everyone. Love the opportunity to talk about what's going on in our world with food banking and food insecurity, and also that important connection at the local level to local food, local farming, and fresh produce, et cetera. So let me give you a quick overview of what we are. Feeding the Carolinas is an independent 501c3 nonprofit. We are the state association that represents the 10 Feeding America food banks across North and South Carolina. There are 10 of those. Every county, all 100 in North Carolina, all 46 in South Carolina, are covered by one of our food banks. And I call these our capital F, capital B food banks. They're the big guys. They're part of Feeding America. They're primarily distribution centers, but much more than that. They do direct distribution, especially during these times. Underneath each of those is a network of what we call partner agencies. These are what I call the small f, small b food banks. When someone says food bank, that's typically what they're thinking about. Their church pantry, the community food closet, those kind of folks. There are close to 4,000 of those pre-pandemic times that were out there all the way down to your local community. And so we have that network. They're all independent organizations, primarily volunteer driven, and we will source food to them down to the local community, as well as doing direct distribution. And so it's kind of the big picture of what we are. We are a part of Feeding America. There are 20 what they call partner state associations across the country. We're the only multi-state one. And then our food banks, our 10, are part of the network of 200 Feeding America food banks across the country.
That's great. And thank you for that information, Mike. I think a lot of people haven't heard that whole picture before about just how many institutions and communities are involved in doing this work. And I think as a North and South Carolina organization ourselves, it's great to be able to have these conversations about both of our Carolinas. So a lot of folks have, through COVID, had to think more about food security, and a lot of folks have had to connect with you all. And we've seen the lines, we've heard these stories. Tell us, just to ground us a little bit, what are you seeing on the ground right now in those food pantries in those communities?
Sure. What we're seeing on the ground now is pretty much the same we saw a year ago when the pandemic hit. We had almost an immediate impact, the trifecta, as I call them, from an immediate increase in demand for food. You remember all the shutdowns of small businesses and those kind of things. It was disproportionately, like in industries like hospitality, restaurants, lower income workers who the last thing they could do is afford to lose their job and have to make decisions about, do I buy food? Do I buy medicine? Do I pay my rent? And so those folks turned to the food banks. We had increases of 30, 40, 50% increase in demand.
Wow.
And a good third of those people coming to the food banks had never been to a food bank before, had never needed one. So we had a massive increase in demand, a dramatic decrease in the food supply, and the food supply chain, it broke. If you remember the great toilet paper, fiasco of us.
We all do.
You remember the shelves of canned goods and all that. It was, food supplies, diminished rapidly, and we are very much driven by donated food, both from individuals like folks I'm talking to on this call. I'm sure have donated a bag of canned food or whatever, all the way to the large retailers who would donate pallets of food. Well, they didn't have it because they were having trouble getting it from the
Mm,
manufacturer. And so our food supply immediately dried up or went from lead times of a few days to 8 weeks to get food in. And then the third hit was loss of volunteers. We're very
mm,
volunteer driven at the food banks. If you think about who is volunteering in any nonprofit organization, it's typically, in general, it's more older folks, it's retired
mhm.
folks, it's more high risk folks for a pandemic. And so, rightfully so, they checked out, and they should have. And also, our partner agencies on the ground, those community folks that you work with in your towns and villages, a lot of them, if you think about if you have a church pantry, I know the one we work with our church, it's our older folks that volunteer because they can be there during the day. They're retired. They shut down. And so we had all of that happening all at once. And so we went from averaging, these are kind of round numbers, but we would purchase, the average food bank was purchasing about $80,000 a month in food. Most was
That's a lot.
donated, jumped to $1 million a month. Our cash burn rate is just, and it continues. We're having to buy food. And so it dramatically changed what we do. It also changed how we distribute food. You know, one of the big things that we like to do is allow people to shop, if you will. And you'll see
Mhm.
that at your local community food bank. You'll see that ours, where it's a little bit about dignity, about self-respect, and allowing people to actually select what they want. That's hard to do during a pandemic with limited contact and all. And with the partner agencies shutting down, we had to go to the people even more, as I call it, take the food to the people. And so we shifted.
Yeah.
We are very, very good at disaster relief. You know, my first week on the job, my first day on the job, Hurricane Florence and I showed up in the Carolinas at the same day.
Oh
That was
my.
my first day. And so I was on the ground seeing the magic and the power of our food banks working together to meet the needs of food. And so we knew how, in a disaster, how to do things like disaster boxes, we call them, which are meals for a family of 4 for a week. That's in a box, easy to take out and deliver. Of course, we've never had, natural disasters don't last for a year, and they don't hit every single county in both states.
Absolutely.
But we could use that expertise, and so we started doing direct distributions of these boxes out in the communities, and also drive-through distributions, which you've probably seen pictures of cars lined up. So flash forward to today, same increases in demand. Food supply is getting a little bit better in terms of lead times, but we're still having to purchase. We're still, spending a lot of money purchasing.
Yeah.
And the demand continues, and it's going to continue for a while as the economy works on coming back.
I think so. And that's one of the things, talking about relief as well as moving towards recovery. And I think what I'm hearing from everyone really is that this is exposing vulnerabilities in our systems and how we take care of each other, and just exacerbating what's already been there. And I think this is a really good segue. I'm talking about just the dramatically increased need that really requires public investment from our state and federal governments to help meet this demand. And one of the things, learning about this job and thinking, I really like your grocery store model and people being able to pick the food that they want and having that access. And one of the things I've learned, that the number one thing people are asking for is fresh produce. And that fresh food that they need to be able to stay healthy, because it's not just about having food, it's about having quality food that you can thrive on. And I want to take a moment to just say, and hearing Mike talking about the economic downturn and about restaurant and hospitality workers in particular, is something we at CFSA saw as well, especially as restaurants were shutting down, as farmers were losing markets and had all this delicious, healthy produce to sell. And there was just a natural way to come together. And so I just want to take a moment, and I've even got stats, to talk about this program, as well as a program called Farm Fresh, a pilot program that one of the member food banks of Feeding the Carolinas, Second Harvest, up in the northwest part of the state did. So the first is called Farm Share. And those of us who know CFSA and who have been following the work we know that Jared Cates from our staff was out gardening and thinking this, well, all these farmers they've got food that they need to provide. And there's all these restaurant and hospitality workers who have just lost their jobs. And so FarmShare, with just around a little upwards of $900,000 in funding from Blue Cross Blue Shield, did a relatively simple model. Farmers and food hubs, and in this program, there were, I believe, 10 food hubs and 80 farmers were paid up front for boxes of produce that then went to the people who needed them, who didn't pay for them. We had the funding to be able to do that. And just to give you some stats, there were 22,000 boxes of food, 165,000 pounds of vegetables, 11.6 thousand pounds of meat, over 10,000 dozen eggs, and 1,800 pounds of grains, cheeses, and all these delicious foods, creating $1.6 million in local economies. Because that's one of the things that can help raise all boats, is if we can improve our economies, that can help lower the demand. And I was thrilled to learn that a similar program where Second Harvest purchased community sustainable agriculture shares. They were a smaller scale program, but they bought 500 boxes of fresh food, 9,500 pounds of fresh produce, and they served 100 households. And what I think was very interesting about this program is they took it a step further and did all this education about healthy eating and about ways to prepare the food. And they worked with families. And I think 100% of the people said they were eating better because of this program. And so then I just want to ask you, like, this just shows a lot of potential, what could happen with a public investment, and what would that mean if we could do that by working together?
Right, I agree, and that's a real area of focus for Feeding the Carolinas and our member food banks is fresh food, nutritious food, and the education that goes along with it. How do I prepare this food? And one of the challenges is the logistics of getting it from the local farmer to those in need. And so we have a farm to food bank program. We have a farm to food bank director that works with local, regional growers to get produce to our food banks to then distribute out. But of course, I always believe the best solution are local solutions.
Yep.
And so local farmers working with local food banks, partner agencies, community food closets, farmers markets, those kind of things, to connect locally, because it's with it being perishable, certainly it's quicker, it's getting direct to the people. And where the investment can come into play is the logistics of it. It's the transportation, and in particular, refrigerated capacity at the local community level. Do they have the refrigeration or the freezer units to be able to store and then move the produce along? And so that's something that Blue Cross Foundation North Carolina recently has helped us to purchase refrigerated units down at the local level. Our food banks are doing that now. We're always looking at ways to expand capacity, and that's both public and private, resources, funding to help with that, and that's very important.
Well, yet another great thing that Blue Cross Blue Shield is doing, and their commitment to working on these issues, is really bringing us together in a lot of ways, and I think really opens up these possibilities. And one of the things that Amanda Heggie, who is the incredible staff person, dietitian who ran this program, told me is that this really changed the conversation, and it also created relationships in those communities. Like, a lot of the folks who are getting this food at food banks we're now in food pantries. We're like, hey, where's this farmer's market? How do we get more of that? And, as Mike and others know, and I think we had Emily Kraft from the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina last summer, when we were all working together to support online SNAP. SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. I have a no acronym policy on the show. And we worked together on that because it was just a really big picture. And I think, again, this connects the public and the private in this. And so it was really, really powerful to build those relationships. And I think one other thing I'll remark on is this issue of refrigerator trucks and distribution. And one of the reasons the partnership with the restaurant and hospitality industry worked is because they had refrigerators and they had a place and their workers knew where it was and they could go get it. But we have to look at this holistically. And I think one of the advantages of food hubs is we've got these aggregation systems and the ability to do that. So it seems to me there's a lot of opportunities for innovation and solutions with that public Oh, we've got a question. So, well, one, I want to give you a chance to that, and then looks like we've got a question about disaster boxes.
Yeah, I was just going to mention real quick that from a policy perspective, we are proponents of anything that increases, SNAP benefits, because that's one of the most efficient ways for people to get food in the grocery stores, online SNAP, farmers markets, in particular, anything that allows people, if we can availability and access, and also just amount as well. That's a very efficient way to do it. I see the question about are disaster boxes something new? Not defeating the Carolinas, during Hurricane Florence and then Matthew and others before that, that was a common where we'd go into an area that was hit, usually the coast, and deliver these boxes of meals for a week. And it's something that Feeding America does across the country. We did it quite a bit during Florence, because that was a pretty major. 5 of our 10 food banks were impacted. And so folks like Second Harvest Metrolina, who are inland, they did tens of thousands of disaster boxes and delivered them across the Carolinas to help with that, because that was a long expansion. And so having that natural disaster experience parlayed into a lot of what we're doing now, it's different, but they're conceptually allowed. It's limited contact. It's a little bit more efficient, and so it's something that our food banks do to help to get the food out to those in need. I hope that answers the question.
And I muted myself because one of the fun parts of working at home is landscaping apparently happens outside your window and we're doing a live broadcast. So I want to have a couple more questions for Mike. I want to really appreciate the time. I know how busy it is and how much work y'all are doing to keep folks fed, but I just want to ask a general question: that why is it important that we work together? I think this has been throughout this entire conversation, but why is local farms, local food, our food banks and our food pantries working together to increase SNAP, just working together generally? Why is that so important?
Well, first of all, because food insecurity impacts all of us. It impacts our friends and neighbors. When we're looking at down our neighborhood or sitting in church when we could go to church, looking across our pews, our friends and neighbors are in need. It's 1 in 5 adults, 1 in 4 children now, roughly, are food insecure, and so it's something that's important. But also the criticality of fresh food, produce, protein, dairy. Is of critical importance, because it's not just about quantity. We're very much have moved over into quality, into fresh.
Absolutely.
Food as medicine. I was mentioning to Nick earlier, I used to work with free health clinics, back a few years ago. And so even back then we were talking about food as medicine, but it's important. And the connection with local farmers is critical, because all these things are local solutions. I think it's always about local community and what we can do to drive everything down to the community level and support. And so this connection between CSFA and Feeding the Carolinas, I think, is very important because of that. And how can we learn together? There's an abundance of produce in the Carolinas. We are in a produce-rich state, and we've had a record year in volume of produce that we've distributed this year. Some of it was because the restaurants and different hospitality shut down, just a number of different, the government, USDA, a number of different things, but we're still not touching it. We're not touching it. And you folks, you farmers out there that are on this call, better than I do about the efficiencies of that. And so there's just so much food that it's a shame to let it go to waste, but yet we got to figure out how to manage that at the local community level. And so I think, we're kind of distribution experts, and we're kind of that big picture, cover all the counties and all that. And then with CSFP, experts in kind of farming and that local, and how do we connect all that? And so I think continuing this conversation is very important, because we're very focused on that fresh food.
Absolutely. And I think in good news for our audience, many of you know, but we've gotten more funding this year from Blue Cross Blue Shield, and we're actually going to be hiring somebody to help manage that side of it. And of course, on the policy end, our job is to push for that funding, because I think we know there needs to be a public investment in this. We need private support. We see it. People are generous, people are giving, but we need to work together because there's a whole lot up there. There's a whole lot of resources that could help facilitate this and help get this down, so that the communities can work. And so we've got a question, and I'm actually going to have to say we're getting close to our time, but want to see if you have a quick answer to this question. We've got fresh meat and dairy typically require refrigeration. What non-meat and non-dairy initiatives does Feeding the Carolinas and CFSA have?
I guess that's referring to fresh product like produce.
And meat and dairy, I think, in particularly, because they're even more vulnerable than
Right.
the vegetables for spoilage. And
yeah, and we do work. We get USDA bulk commodity product, which is often has like cheese, milk, that kind of thing. Fresh meat. You think of the different meat producers in our state. They donate. That, and the challenge is getting it out quickly and getting it distributed. Refrigeration is a challenge. We're exploring that. We've got to build the infrastructure to support that. Produce certainly is another. Not quite as much refrigeration sometimes, but still a factor. And so that's an area of focus. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. We can get into that. Folks can contact me if they'd like. I can share more on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, but this does raise a good point. And we at CFSA are part of the North Carolina Local Food Council that brings together a lot of government folks and nonprofits. And that's where I started connecting with the food folks. And we talk about pinch points being just the ability to make this run smoother. And we hear refrigeration. And these are public infrastructures that we can have investment in. Because if you're talking about logistics, which I'm looking at the logistics experts over there at Feeding the Carolinas and Associated Food Banks and Pantries. But it's a really big issue, and it's incredibly, just a little bit goes a heck of a long way in this. And so, but working together, I think we can work for that over the long term, because this is about recovery and crises happen. So we are running near our time. I want to, as is tradition, give Mike one chance to let us know about how you can support their efforts. Any final thoughts that you have, and then we'll move on to the many meetings and things we have.
Sure. So, the need continues on, even as we're getting, vaccinations out there and hopefully kind of starting to come out from under the economy and the lag on that. We're anticipating, this year and beyond, continuing to have this large increase in demand. You can go to our website, feedingthecarolinas.org. You can click Find a Food Bank, and you can put in your county. It'll tell you what food bank supports your county. And then you can go to their site. You can volunteer, you can donate, or you can find a local community food bank through their website, because we have that in there too. And, and if you're a local farmer, look for that local community food pantry and then see what you can do to help them in donating. So the need continues for funds to purchase food, but certainly volunteering if people can. And we're doing things in a COVID safe social distancing. We've retooled, if you will. And then also, that support your local, community food pantries. And that's a way to find them through our website, through Find a Food Bank. Excellent.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. I see one more comment, which I just think is such an appropriate comment to end this conversation on. Someone from, looks like Charlotte and Apex. It says, eating food only from local farmers and looking better than they have in years, real food. So on that note, thank you, Mike. Thanks to our audience. And hopefully many of y'all will see this coming forward as we share the link, and we'll continue doing this good work together. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for what you're all doing. Thank you.